Hello, this is Krystal Stanich, and thank you for joining me for this week's First Chapter Friday. Today I will be reading from the beginning of Daphne du Maurier's Jamaica Inn. Chapter 1. It was a cold, gray day in late November. The weather had changed overnight when a backing wind brought a granite sky and a mizzling rain with it. And although it was now only a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the pallor of a winter evening seemed to have closed upon the hills, cloaking them in mist. It would be dark by 4. The air was clammy cold, and for all the tightly closed windows, it penetrated the interior of the coach. The leather seats felt damp to the hands, and there must have been a small crack in the roof, because now and again little drips of rain fell softly through, smudging the leather and leaving a dark blue stain like a splodge of ink. The wind came in gusts, at times shaking the coach as it traveled round the bend of the road, and in the exposed places on the high ground it blew with such force that the whole body of the coach trembled and swayed, rocking between the high wheels like a drunken man. The driver, muffled in a greatcoat to his ears, bent almost double in his seat in a faint endeavor to gain shelter from his own shoulders, while the dispirited horses plodded sullenly to his command, too broken by the wind and the rain to feel the whip that now and again cracked above their heads, while it swung between the numb fingers of the driver. The wheels of the coach creaked and groaned as they sank into the ruts on the road, and sometimes they flung up the soft spattered mud against the windows, where it mingled with the constant driving rain, and whatever view there might have been of the countryside was hopelessly obscured. The few passengers huddled together for warmth, exclaiming in unison when the coach sank into a heavier rut than usual, and one old fellow, who had kept up a constant complaint ever since he had joined the coach at Truro, rose from his seat in a fury, and, fumbling with the window sash, let the window down with a crash, bringing a shower of rain in upon himself and his fellow passengers. He thrust his head out and shouted up to the driver, cursing him in a high, petulant voice for a rogue and a murderer, that they would all be dead before they reached Bodmin if he persisted in driving at breakneck speed. They had no breath left in their bodies as it was, and he, for one, would never travel by coach again. Whether the driver heard him or not was uncertain. It seemed more likely that the stream of reproaches was carried away in the wind, for the old fellow, after waiting a moment, put up the window again, having thoroughly chilled the interior of the coach, and, settling himself once more in his corner, wrapped his blanket about his knees and muttered in his beard. His nearest neighbor, a jovial, red-faced woman in a blue cloak, sighed heavily in sympathy, and, with a wink to anyone who might be looking, and a jerk of her head toward the old man, she remarked for at least the 20th time that it was the dirtiest night she had ever remembered, and she had known some, that it was a proper old weather, and no mistaking it for summer this time, and, burrowing into the depths of a large basket, she brought out a great hunk of cake, and plunged into it with a strong white teeth. Mary Yellen sat in the opposite corner, where the trickle of rain oozed through the crack in the roof. Sometimes a cold drip of moisture fell upon her shoulder, which she brushed away with impatient fingers. She sat with her chin cupped in her hands, her eyes fixed on the window splashed with mud and rain, hoping, with a sort of desperate interest, that some ray of light would break the heavy blanket of sky, and but a momentary trace of that lost blue heaven that had mantled Halford yesterday shine for an instant as a forerunner of fortune. Already, though barely 40 miles by road from what had been her home for 3 and 20 years, the hope within her heart had tired, and that rather gallant courage which was so large a part of her, and had stood in her in such stead during the long agony of her mother's illness and death, was now shaken by this first fall of rain and the nagging wind. And if you would like to know what happens next, you can check this title out on the Libby app. Please join me here next week as I read from the beginning of A Lakeside Thanksgiving by Leanna Morgan. Thank you and have a great week.